Octavia woke to the sound of water dripping in the distance. She struggled upright and looked around the room. It was small and empty. The only things in it were the musty cot she had woken up on, a candle in the center, and a rusted suit of armor in the corner. She walked to the door and jiggled the knob.
What's going on? Is anybody there?
Octavia felt the rusted metal hinges beneath her hoof. She turned around, closed her eyes, and balanced herself on her forelegs to buck at the door. Her forelegs were immediately pulled out from under her. She yelled as she fell on her stomach. She looked up. The armor looked down on her.
What?
It continued to stare blankly at her, helmet tipped in her direction.
Who's in there?
The armor pointed to the cot. Octavia crawled towards it and climbed back onto the thin sheet.
Hello? I'm Octavia.
The armor put down its raised hoof.
What's your name?
The armor did not move. Octavia began to sob. She heard the armor's hooves clinking and watched it return to the corner where she had first seen it.
Why are you keeping me in here?
The pony in the armor did not speak. She was not sure how long it was until she heard the rattle of a key in the door. A tall stallion with a swept-back mane and instantly recognizable face entered with a cello in hoof. He placed it on the floor in front of her. He looked up at her.
Play.
You're Prince Blueblood. Did you bring me here? Where am I?
With an almost effortless grace, Blueblood smacked her across the mouth. She fell back against the cot.
Play.
No. Tell me what's going on. How did I get here?
Blueblood did not answer. He just walked back to the door, looked over his shoulder at her, and shut it behind him. She could hear the rattling of a lock. After his hoofsteps had faded away, she skulked to the door and put her ear against it. She looked back. The armor was above her again. She backed away and sat on the cot. She looked down at the candle. It had become a short nub. The wax dripped onto the floor. It burned out, and the armor clanked back over to its corner. She softly cried in the dark.
What is going on here?
She had been at home. She had gone to bed, tired from performing that evening. Vinyl had stayed downstairs for some reason. Octavia's head ached from a lump on the back of it, testament to how she had arrived here with no memory of travel. She closed her eyes, and the ache faded along with the world. Her own growling stomach woke her sometime later. She could not tell how much time had passed.
Hey.
She looked in the general direction of the armor's corner. The pony inside it did not move a muscle. The royal guards had competition for impersonal staidness.
What's your name?
There was only silence.
My name's Octavia. But I guess I already said that.
She waited a few minutes.
Aren't you uncomfortable in that suit?
Another few minutes.
Why am I here?
Nothing. The door opened. Blueblood entered with a candle and a sandwich. He placed both on the floor and gestured to the cello he had left behind last time.
Play.
No.
Octavia backed against the wall beside the cot.
Play, or you will be punished.
Octavia swallowed.
No.
Wordlessly, Blueblood picked the sandwich and the candle up again. He left and locked the door behind him. Octavia crept to the door and pressed her eye against the keyhole. She heard a clank. Before she could react, something grabbed her tail and threw her across the room to land in the cot.
Why are you doing this? Let me out, please.
It clanked back over to the corner.
Why don't you say anything? Can't you speak?
It remained silent.
I want to go home.
Vinyl would be worried sick. The thought made Octavia's muscles bunch. She considered running at the door to shoulder it open, but her tail and back still hurt from being thrown onto the cot.
Won't you please let me out?
She tried one more time. Whoever was guarding her refused to answer. Blueblood entered many hours later. He once again carried a sandwich and a candle. He set them on the floor and gestured to the cello.
Play.
Octavia looked down at the sandwich. She picked up her cello. He scooted the sandwich closer to her, though not close enough to touch. She played a few notes and then nearly dropped her bow, the whole room suddenly hazy as she became lightheaded.
Pathetic.
I'm too hungry. I need some damn food.
He crossed the short distance between them, pulled the cello from her grasp, and shoved her so hard that she fell back onto the cot. She scrambled to get up, but the point of the cello's stand hovered millimeters from her throat.
Playing badly is the same as not playing at all.
He replaced the cello against the wall, picked up the sandwich and the candle, and left her in the darkness. She ran to the door and slammed herself against it. Splinters scratched at her skin.
No, please don't.
Ignoring her pleading, the armor picked her up and threw her back on the cot. Desperate and full of adrenaline, she ran for the door again. The armor grabbed her and held her down on the cot.
Let me go.
She struggled against the pony's crushing hold.
Let me go. Let me go. Do you have any compassion? Please, criminal, you can't hold me. I'm an equestrian citizen.
She managed to get one foreleg free and shoved at the pony's face. The helmet came open. Octavia stared at the rear of the inside of the empty suit of armor. There was no pony within it, only a faintly glowing corona of magic causing it to move.
Sweet Celestia!
An empty suit of armor powered by magic could not be reasoned with. It could not be convinced to let her out. Octavia went boneless. After a long while, the empty armor let go of her. She did not leap to her hooves again. It returned to its corner, and she lay where it had put her, tears sliding down the sides of her head. Blueblood entered an indeterminate amount of time later. He placed the sandwich and candle on the floor.
Play.
Octavia picked up the cello and bow. Blueblood stared at her movements the entire time. He smiled as she played, then raised a hoof. She stopped on the clear instruction. He smiled even wider. This time, he left the sandwich and candle behind. She shoved the sandwich into her mouth. She licked the crumbs off the plate. She licked her hooves. She noticed the open door. It was just barely cracked open, but it was open. She began sweating nervously. She looked at the armor in its corner. She looked back at the door. She could try to make a break for it. She could run pretty fast. She continued to sit on her cot without moving. The armor stayed still. She looked at her cello and remembered Blueblood's smile and the grim nothingness in his eyes when he had put the cello spike to her neck. She looked back at the door. It was shut now. Her tears flowed like they would never stop. Blueblood came the next day.
Good girl,
he said without explanation. He had more candles, a sandwich, and a metal bowl filled with water. He placed them in front of her. Her stomach growled loudly.
Play.
She took up the cello and began the same tune as yesterday. Blueblood shook his head. She chose something more upbeat. Blueblood nodded. He left the candles and the food and water. The armor did not move. Octavia did not cry this time.
How long have I been here now?
It was difficult to tell. If she had been a smarter pony, she might have tried making marks on the wall to count the days. But she wasn't smart. She was stupid. She had submitted. She had stopped fighting.
Maybe this is Tartarus. Maybe I died, and this is my eternal punishment.
That would explain why Blueblood was her tormentor when every media article she had ever seen or read about him described him as an arrogant but foppish fool. Prince Blueblood was a harmless, spoiled, rich brat who had grown into a harmless, spoiled, rich stallion. That kind of pony did not kidnap random mares and hold them in stone cells just to make them play music for him.
Rich ponies go to the symphony. They don't stash musicians away like...
The door opened. Like always, Blueblood brought her food and water and light. He didn't even need to vocalize his instructions anymore. All he had to do was tap his hoof, and she played for him until he smiled, tapped again to make her stop, and left. She had no more tears. She just ate the sandwich in slow, steady bites and tried not to look at the ever-watchful armor in the corner. The door opened. She looked up for Blueblood, but did not see him.
Got another one.
A guard in gleaming golden armor yelled over his shoulder. He turned and spoke to her softly.
Are you all right, miss?
She pressed herself against the wall, rooted to her cot.
Don't come any closer. The armor! The armor! Watch out for the armor! It'll hurt you!
The guard looked at the armor. It stayed still. He lifted its visor. It didn't try to pin him down or throw him by his tail or anything. It acted like just a regular suit of armor.
Nothing in there. Let's get you out of here.
No! Can't leave. Can't try to leave. That's when it gets you. That's when it comes alive. Clank, clank. The armor's going to get me. That's all it's here for. To watch me. To make sure I don't try to escape. If I try, it'll hurt me. No, please! It'll kill us!
The guard grabbed her and made for the door. She kept her eyes on the armor as they left the cell, unable to believe that it did not thunder towards them and grab them both to hurl them against the wall. They exited out across a cobbled courtyard that hurt Octavia's sensitive hooves. Sunlight stung her eyes. Dozens of guards littered the lawn of Blueblood's castle. One was writing in a thick book. The rest were helping emaciated ponies out of the sumptuous building. Ambulance carts waited along the road.
The armor! It doesn't move when you can see it! It'll come after me.
Uh-huh. Redheart, got another one here for you.
She was in the room of a hospital. She was not sure where. She had not asked. She had to keep her eyes open. The armor would follow her. She knew it would.
That's a very nice cutie mark.
The nurse who had helped her wash her straggly, greasy mane set a sandwich down on the bedside tray. She was conversational and sweet, talking all the time in a soft tone that invited trust and confidence. She was making small talk. All the nurses tending the ponies from Blueblood's mansion were making small talk.
What do you play?
Play.
Octavia began pantomiming playing her cello, movements a blur as she instinctively sought to render that special smile from the pony in front of her. No, she was free, she was out. She didn't have to do this anymore. Yet she could not stop. Her body would not let her. The nurse lunged for her flailing hooves, trying to make her stop.
Doctor, come quick!
Prince Blueblood walked through the gardens of Pants Manor. He did not care for the bright fauna or give a damn that the buzzards really buzzed. He was here for one reason: to watch his cousin make a fool of himself. Fancy Pants led a small puppy on a leash. The animal slobbered and ran through his legs in figure eights. Fancy Pants fell down after becoming entangled in the leash.
That's not how you handle a dog.
Blueblood commented and untangled the leash.
You have to be in control of him constantly.
I've seen how you handle animals. Some might say it's borderline abusive.
Fancy Pants dusted off his black tailcoat.
And those ponies would be wrong. I'm simply firm with creatures beneath us.
Blueblood snorted and took the leash from Fancy.
You have to keep the leash short at first.
He wrapped a good length of it around his hoof.
Keep your orders simple, and your tone firm.
He looked down at the dog.
Woof.
The dog now panted beside Blueblood's right foreleg.
I'll never understand why he obeys you so quickly. You have a way with animals.
Fancy Pants complimented.
It's easy.
Blueblood kept the leash tight around his hoof.
Do you have any treats for him?
Fancy Pants gave Blueblood a small, crumbly bone.
Sit.
Blueblood commanded. He placed the treat on the dog's nose.
Take.
Quite impressive. Now, if only we could keep him from piddling on the carpet.
That's easy, too. Punish him as soon as it happens. He needs to associate pain with actions you don't want from him. He'll soon learn to obey you.
I think we'll just keep with the crate training.
If you think that's best.
Blueblood handed the leash back to Fancy.
Can I expect to see you at tonight's symphony?
Always. Do you still have your seats in the Founder's box?
Yes, of course.
Fancy lifted his hooves to prevent them from being tangled in the leash.
The Grand Canterlot Orchestra has been quite good to me in that regard.
Blueblood pulled a pocket watch out of his vest.
Good. I'd best be off, though. I have some things to take care of before then. I'm sorry for any inconvenience.
Quite all right. I'll see you tonight.
Blueblood stared down at his pocket watch.
Late.
He muttered.
Fancy is never late. This is most inconsiderate.
He tapped his hooves on the gold railing that surrounded the balcony. The orchestra was beginning to assemble, each musician tuning his or her instrument.
Fleur?
Blueblood turned to the mare a few seats to his right. She barely ever spoke to him. It was very irritating.
Did Fancy Pants say if he had anything to take care of?
Fleur shook her head. Blueblood let out a harumph and continued clicking his hooves on the rails.
My most sincere apologies.
Fancy Pants entered through the archway and took his seat beside Fleur, exchanging the usual kissed cheeks she insisted upon in some sort of ridiculous French cultural throwback.
My carriage was running late, and while I was alighting from it, I happened to meet some pony who wanted to view the symphony as well.
I thought I could find a scalper.
A mare Blueblood did not know sat down between himself and Fancy like she actually had any place there. Her electric blue mane was an eyesore, and she was wearing sunglasses indoors. Blueblood stared in dismayed horror at what his cousin had put amongst them.
I couldn't get a ticket in time, but I figured, no biggie, there's always a scalper.
Vinyl Blueblood, Blueblood Vinyl. Vinyl Fleur, Fleur Vinyl.
Fancy Pants introduced them.
A scalper?
Blueblood's upper lip curled.
You seem used to a different kind of concert.
Yeah, I don't normally go to these kinds of things, but see that mare on the cello? I promised her I'd show up, and Vinyl Scratch doesn't break promises.
Ah.
Blueblood nodded, looking down at the soft gray mare Vinyl pointed at. She sat demurely in her seat, awaiting the conductor's signal to begin. He narrowed his eyes in thought.
I actually think I've seen her before.
She plays at all sorts of fancy gigs. You've probably seen her at one of those. She was at the Grand Galloping Gala.
Ah, yes, though I can't quite remember her name.
Blueblood flicked through the program.
Octavia Melody?
Yeah, she really likes this new gig.
Vinyl took off her revolting sunglasses.
We're thinking about getting a new place with extra money.
Is there something wrong with your current residence?
Blueblood picked a stray thread from his smoking jacket.
It is way too close to the train station. It's big enough, but the noise wakes us up at all hours.
I see. I have a friend who's a realtor. If you'd like, I can give him your address, and he can add you to his mailing list. Fancy, do you have a pen?
Of course.
Fancy Pants pulled a fountain pen from his jacket and floated it to Vinyl.
Thanks.
Vinyl scribbled her address on the back of her program, passed it to Blueblood, and gave the pen back to Fancy.
Thanks, Fancy,
she said with entirely too much familiarity.
You're welcome, but quiet now, everyone.
Fancy Pants whispered.
Panofsky has arrived.
Throughout the performance, Blueblood watched the soft gray mare draw her bow across the strings of her cello. Blueblood walked quietly across the marble floors of his chateau. He reached into a box in the hardwood wall. A light bell rang. A servant stepped out of a false wall and bowed low. Blueblood handed him the program with the childish scrawl on it.
Go here. I want the grey mare. Be careful, she does not live alone. Don't leave anything that can be traced back to you.
The servant nodded, snapped his soft white cloth boots in place, and left. Blueblood reached into the small box and pulled another lever. Another servant stepped out of the false wall.
Make up the rations for tonight. No water tonight for 3B, no candle for it either.
The servant bowed and stepped back into the false wall. Blueblood walked down the stone steps to the wine cellar. At the bottom, he removed the rough stones from one far wall and stepped into an unlit tunnel. He waited until the servant arrived with a gurney covered in sandwiches, bowls of water, and candles.
Leave now, I'll do the rest.
He pulled a keyring out of his coat pocket and unlocked one of the many doors in the tunnel. He raised up a sandwich, a bowl of water, and a candle. He opened the door and stepped into the poorly lit room with a piano in the corner. An emaciated stallion stirred and looked up at him. Blueblood gestured to the piano, tapped his hoof, and the stallion rushed to it. He played for 30 minutes until Blueblood tapped his hoof again. He set the provisions down on the stone floor and left. The stallion ate greedily as Blueblood locked the door behind him. He unlocked the door with 3B carved into it, not hopeful of what he would find within. He stepped into the room and looked at the filthy pink mare asleep in the corner. Blueblood stomped his hoof, causing her to stir. She looked up at him rebelliously, refusing to stand.
Play.
He vocalized what he wanted from this one, also gesturing to the violin beside her.
No.
She answered weakly. Blueblood smacked her across the face, adding to the many bruises already there.
Play.
She glared up at him and slammed her hoof down on the violin, breaking its neck.
No.
Blueblood sighed. He pulled a length of cord from his jacket and approached her. She backed into the corner, green eyes wide. Apparently, she had not gotten the message that disobedience brought punishment.
No, you can't do that!
He looped the cord around her neck and pulled in opposite directions. She sputtered beneath him and coughed in his face. He pulled tighter and watched her eyes slide back, the lids blinking randomly. She kicked underneath him, movements growing weaker until she stopped moving completely. He held on for a while longer before dropping the useless carcass to the floor. He pocketed his cord and walked out of the room, not bothering to lock it. He stepped into another room. A griffin stirred in the corner and looked up at him. He grabbed his bassoon off the wall and played a long tune. Blueblood smiled and set a sandwich on his beak.
Take.
The griffin snapped it up immediately. He raised his bassoon again.
No.
Blueblood stated and walked out the door. His servant was waiting for him with a large sack thrown over his back.
Very quick. I'm pleased with you. Were you spotted?
The servant shook his head.
Good. Place her in 3B. Please dispose of the garbage in there while you're at it.
It's so good of you to have us over for tea, Blueblood.
Fancy Pants said cheerily.
Fleur and I greatly appreciate it.
Think nothing of it. As often as you invite me to the symphony, it would not reflect well on me to be inhospitable.
Blueblood smiled. Fleur whispered into Fancy's ear.
I'm sorry, but Fleur would like to know where the water closet is. I'm not entirely sure where it is. I apologize.
It's quite all right, though she could ask me herself.
Blueblood rang a bell. A silent servant appeared.
Mr. Hoof, would you please show Fleur to the restroom?
The servant, Mr. Hoof, nodded and Fleur followed him out.
Thank you, Blueblood.
Fancy Pants sipped his tea.
Speaking of the symphony, will you be joining us tonight? It has been a few months since you last graced them with your presence.
Well, I suppose I should let the lesser folk admire me. But it will have to be some other time. I'm scheduled to be groomed tonight. I'm overdue for a hoofacure.
Blueblood laughed.
I understand.
Fancy Pants laughed as well.
We can't have our prince looking like he just came off the street.
Quite right. I don't care what anyone says. I am judged harder for my appearance than anyone else in this city.
What about the princesses? They're in the public eye more than anyone else.
Yes, but their manes seem to be made of magic.
Blueblood debated, and then spoke with a higher pitch.
Oh, I'll just brush my mane. Wait, it's already done. Yay! Magic!
Fancy Pants accidentally choked on his tea, emitting a combination of a chuckle and cough.
That is most inappropriate.
Yes, but I can't make you laugh otherwise.
Fleur trotted back into the room and whispered into Fancy's ear.
Oh, I'm sorry, but Fleur is not feeling well. I'm afraid we'll have to cut this social gathering short. Again, my apologies.
All is forgiven.
Blueblood replied mildly.
Until next time.
Blueblood rang the bell, but no pony came. He looked around and threw the bell into the unopened secret passage in the wall. A passing servant picked it off the ground and trotted to Blueblood's side.
Where is Mr. Hoof?
The servant shook her head.
Then find him.
They found him quickly. Mr. Hoof lay in the wine cellar next to the open tunnel. A smashed bottle lay in a puddle of spreading wine and blood beside him.
This is not good.
Blueblood snarled and looked to the 12 servants who had gathered at his shouts.
Dispose of the evidence quickly.
The servants looked to each other.
Now!
They scattered. Too late. The door into the wine cellar burst open. 6 guards in gleaming gold armor rushed into the cellar. Blueblood looked at the spear pointed right in his face.
Can I help you?
His voice remained mild, as if this was no matter worth bothering about.
You can place your hooves behind your head and your muzzle to the ground.
The guard suggested.
Or you could resist and make this fun for everyone involved.
Blueblood chose the first option.
How many, sir?
Fancy Pants asked, watching as a babbling gray mare was loaded into an ambulance. He recognized her from the symphony. Now her sudden absence from the orchestra made more sense. His heart clenched.
23. And there's no telling how many he disposed of.
Are the chateau staff surrendering any information?
Nothing. They can't. They're all mute.
The guard's laugh was mirthless.
It's funny. Blueblood was actually given a plaque for hiring disabled ponies.
Can they write?
Only some. And just barely. We've found one that can write basic stuff, but I can't tell you what he told us.
Fancy Pants slid a jingling bag to the guard.
Our young prince has kidnapped at least 40 creatures over these years. All of them talented musicians, professionals for the most part. They are from all over Equestria and beyond. One of those recovered today was a griffin, actually an up-and-coming bassoonist who went missing, apparently after a lover's tiff with his partner 3 years ago. We can't interview any of them until the departmental shrink checks them out. Near as we can tell, it looks like it started about 10 years back, but most of those cases were dismissed as robbery. He would have a servant kidnap a pony, make it look like they stole from those they lived with, and disappeared.
And what will happen to Blueblood now?
Fancy Pants slid another bag to the guard.
The same thing that happens to any criminal.
The guard slid the bag back to Fancy.
Trial and imprisonment.
It's in my apartment. Why is it in my apartment? Did it follow me? Why can no pony else see it? No, they think it's all in my head. But it's grabbed me before. It's hurt me before. Does it want to hurt me now? I can't tell. It just sits there in the corner watching me, waiting for me to try to escape. That's what it does. It keeps me prisoner. I can't break eye contact with it. I have to watch it constantly. It moves when you can't see it. It clanks around at night. But in the day, it watches. It watches me, and it waits.
Tavy?
Vinyl entered the living room.
What's wrong? What are you looking at?
It moves.
Octavia refused to break eye contact with the empty corner.
But only when you can't see it. That's when it moves.
When what moves?
The armor.
Tavy, look at me. There's nothing there.
Vinyl embraced her.
It's only me and you in here. No pony else. That corner is empty. There's nothing there.
Octavia looked back at the corner.
It's not there?
Right.
Vinyl smiled.
You're safe now. You're home.
It must have moved!
Octavia screamed.
It moves! It moves! It's enchanted! Enchanted to keep me inside the cell!
Tavy, calm down! Please!
Vinyl? What are you doing here?
Octavia looked around.
I'm not in the cell.
No, you're not. You're home. With me. Safe at home with me. Did you take your medicine today?
Medicine? No! No, I can't take the medicine. If I take the medicine, then I can't see it. And that means it could be anywhere. He magicked it to watch me. I'm his property, and he protects his property. Unless his property does something stupid like try to escape. Then he hurts it. He hurts.
It's not real. Please, Tavy, sit down.
Vinyl. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
It's okay, love. Come on. Sit down and I'll fetch your meds.
She led Octavia over to the love seat and guided her into a seated position.
I'm going to get you some water so you can take your pills. Do you know where you left your medicine?
No, I don't remember.
Octavia leaned back. Vinyl backed into the kitchen and rummaged through the cabinets. She finally found an orange, translucent bottle and shook out 2 pills. She filled a chipped mug with water. A crash echoed and the shattering of glass resounded throughout the apartment.
Tavy!
She flung the mug into the sink and galloped into the living room. Octavia struggled on the floor, her back on their shattered glass coffee table as if she had been thrown on top of it, or launched herself from a standing position on the love seat.
It's here! 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 Vinyl is here! It's here! It's come for me! It came for me! The armor came, please! Put me back! 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 It's here! It's here!
Vinyl waited in the hospital, seated on a double-stuffed wingback chair in a tiny waiting room. She pulled loose threads from a tear in the cushion and frowned to herself.
Excuse me?
Fancy Pants entered.
I just got the news from a colleague of mine. Is Miss Octavia all right?
She'll be okay.
Vinyl muttered.
She kept grabbing at the broken glass. They were able to take care of it with some dermabond. You know, the superglue-like stuff. The doctors are talking to her to make sure it wasn't a domestic dispute. Like I would ever hurt Tavy.
She looked away, frown deepening into a scowl.
May I ask what happened?
Fancy sat down in a stool across from her. His refined self looked ridiculous in the ratty waiting room decor.
No.
Vinyl sobbed, squeezing her eyes shut.
Sorry, I'm just real emotional right now.
Understandable. You've been through a lot too. Are you all right?
I guess.
Vinyl slumped in her chair.
This is just all my fault. If I had just bought a ticket, then I wouldn't have sat beside Blueblood. I wouldn't have drawn his attention to her.
You mustn't blame yourself for this. The fault is Blueblood's, and I'm doing my best to ensure that the rest of his life will be in prison.
Is that why you're here? Is this about the trial?
I do want to speak to Miss Octavia on the matter, but not here. This would be a most inappropriate place for it.
We'll have to meet sometime then.
Vinyl tore a page from a magazine.
But not at my apartment. I don't give out our address anymore.
That's understandable.
Fancy pulled a fountain pen from his breast pocket.
What would you say to that quaint cafe on Cherry Street?
We can't afford to eat out right now. Octavia's medicine costs a lot, and now I have this ER bill to pay, and the rent's due in a week.
Vinyl pressed her face into her hooves.
I kinda haven't worked since Tavy came home. I didn't want to leave her alone, but I need to work because I'm what's the word? Breadwinner? Yeah, that's it. I'm the breadwinner of our household now, so I...
How much?
Fancy pulled out a checkbook.
Huh?
Vinyl looked at him, confused.
How much is your rent?
She frowned.
I can't let you do that, Fancy. I don't know when we could pay you back.
It's not a loan. I give gifts, not loans. Now, how much is your rent?
900 bits.
Vinyl confided.
All right.
Fancy scribbled on the check and tore it out of the book.
I have some litigation in the works. The idea is to auction off all of Blueblood's assets and have the proceeds go to the families of those who had suffered because of him. This should be enough to last you until the litigation is finalized.
Thank you.
Vinyl accepted the check, eyes rounding so much she wished she still had her shades on to hide her surprise.
This is more than 900.
I know.
Vinyl looked up at him.
So, where did you want to meet again?
A day latte was as fine as a cafe could be without becoming gaudy. It was perhaps the first upmarket cafe in which Octavia and Vinyl both felt comfortable. Fancy Pants smiled. Being able to pick a locale that didn't offend any guest's sensibilities was the mark of a good host.
How are you, Miss Octavia?
Fancy Pants slid into his chair. Showing up late was not normal for him, but in this case he understood that allowing his guests time to talk alone was important. It was another mark of a good host.
I'm fine.
Octavia rubbed her bandaged forelegs.
The doctors have switched my medicines around. It seems to be helping somewhat.
Wonderful.
Fancy Pants waved Fleur over. It would not have been appropriate for him to meet two young mares by himself. He wouldn't allow rumors to spread about his guests. Another mark of a thoughtful host.
And you, Miss Scratch?
I'm doing okay.
Vinyl's posture slid her ever so slightly closer towards Octavia. Fleur stepped over to Octavia and hugged her, kissing both sides of her face. She then embraced Vinyl, kissing both sides of her face. Vinyl blushed.
Oh, you're real pretty, Miss Dillis, but I'm taken.
That's just how Fleur greets ponies, I assure you.
Oh.
Octavia kissed both of Fleur's cheeks in return. Vinyl frowned.
Sorry, but no. The only pony I kiss is Tavy.
Octavia's eyes rounded.
Sorry.
She pressed her hooves to the sides of her head, posture suffused with sudden panic.
Stupid.
No, it's okay, love.
Vinyl prized the hooves away and held them gently in her own.
You're not stupid.
But
Tavy, remember what I said? You're allowed to do what you want. No pony will punish you for making your own decisions. And definitely not me. Okay?
Okay.
Please, have a seat, my dear.
Fancy Pants gestured Fleur to a stool beside him.
Now, Miss Octavia, I wanted to make a request.
I'll do it.
Octavia interrupted.
You wish for me to speak at the trial, correct?
Oh, well, yes. But only if you're comfortable with it.
I'll never be comfortable with that monster, but I understand that none of the other musicians wish to speak either. A conviction would be much easier if at least one of us speaks.
That's quite noble of you. Miss Scratch, would you be willing to speak as well?
Vinyl nodded.
Very well.
Fancy drew himself up. He had not expected that part of the conversation to happen so soon or swiftly.
I don't recommend any sandwiches from here, but the pastries are quite nice.
Vinyl took the witness stand. Blueblood glared at her from his table in the courtroom. She returned his glare tenfold.
State your name and occupation, please.
The prosecutor requested.
Vinyl Scratch, I'm a freelancing DJ.
How do you know the defendant?
I didn't know him until 3 months ago. I wanted to attend the symphony to watch Octavia play, but I couldn't get a ticket in time. Fancy Pants and I met outside of the concert hall. He offered to let me sit in the founder's box after he heard I wouldn't get to see my mayor friend play otherwise.
Please, continue.
I met Blueblood there. He seemed okay at the time. I pointed out Octavia to him and told him how happy she was to be playing for the Candlelight Symphony. I mentioned in conversation that we were looking for a new apartment. He told me that he knew a realtor and asked for our address. I gave it to him.
She didn't manage to hold back her wince.
I told him where we lived.
What happened when you got home that night?
Octavia got home just a little after I did. I wanted to go to a bar. I wanted to support her when she was performing, but I find the symphony dull and wanted to let off some steam. She said she was tired and going to bed. I went out, she stayed in. When I got home, our apartment was trashed and Octavia wasn't there.
He had taken Octavia so easily because she wasn't there to stop him. Even though it was irrational, even though there was no way she could have known how that night would end, she would never forgive herself for that. The questions seemed to go on and on from both the prosecution and the defense, but eventually the judge spoke.
Thank you, Miss Scratch. You may now step down from the witness stand.
Octavia was on the stand next.
I can do this. I can.
Blueblood smiled at her. She refused to look at him. Vinyl was doing enough glaring for both of them.
Octavia.
She stated her name as requested.
Can you tell us about the event that occurred 3 months ago?
Yes. I was playing at this...
Blueblood tapped his hoof on the desk. Octavia fell immediately silent.
Please, continue.
The prosecutor urged. She cleared her throat.
I was playing at the symphony. It was my first real job in quite a while, and I was ecstatic about it. But I was quite tired when I got home. Vinyl tried to get me to go out with her for the night, but again, I was quite tired. Shortly after she left for the bar...
Blueblood tapped his hoof on the desk again. Octavia's mouth snapped shut. She felt her forelegs twitching against her will as they tried to drag an imaginary bow across imaginary cello strings.
Objection, Your Honor. The defendant is badgering the witness.
Prince Blueblood, if you do not cease your ill-advised actions, I will be forced to—
I can't do this!
Octavia scrambled out of the witness stand and galloped through the courtroom for the exit.
I'm sorry, I can't.
Davy, wait!
Vinyl called after her, but Octavia did not listen. Blueblood smiled.
Davy?
Vinyl knocked on the door to her room. Silence.
Davy, can I come in?
Still silence.
I'm coming in. Don't throw anything, okay? I'm not,
Not the armor? Not him? Octavia wasn't sure what Vinyl had been about to say. None of the options that presented themselves were palatable ones. Vinyl opened the door and saw Octavia sitting on her bed, rolling a candle around in her hooves.
Hi.
Hey.
Vinyl sat down beside her.
Sorry about today.
It's fine.
No, it's not.
Octavia said fiercely.
It's not fine.
It was the first time you've seen him since it happened.
I thought I could that I could handle it.
She clenched the candle tightly.
All he had to do was tap on that table, Vinyl. Just tap on the bloody table. And he had me again. I couldn't resist.
He held you for 4 months, Tavy. He messed with your head. Taking the witness stand like that with him in the same room was always a gamble.
I thought I was getting better.
Octavia sounded like she was ready to cry.
But all he had to do was tap on the table. And suddenly none of the therapy sessions, none of the pills, none of it mattered. I was back there, in that room.
Vinyl bit her lip.
You've never really told me what happened when after he kidnapped you. I mean, you told me about the armor, but you were always a bit,
round the twist when I talked about it.
Octavia said flatly.
Damaged. A lot of what you said didn't make sense. I didn't know what was real and what was delusional. I never pushed because I'd figured you'd talk to me about it when you were ready. As long as you talked to the doctors about it, that seemed more important.
She paused.
Do you want to talk to me about it now?
I am terrified. I know that this isn't real now, but it's still in the corner. It can clank away all at once, but that doesn't make it any more real. I refuse to be scared of it now, because I saw a real monster today. I don't think that something hallucinatory can ever terrify me again, but that monster, the demon with the fancy lapels, he is terrifying. But Vinyl is here. I'm lucky to have her. She's put up with so much of my ridiculousness. I don't know what I'd do without her. No pony's coming to save me. No pony wants me, otherwise they would have found me by now. No pony wants me except him. He owns me.
Tavy?
Vinyl put a hoof on Octavia's own.
It's okay if you don't want to talk about it. I'll still be here when you're ready. I'm not going anywhere.
Vinyl had never gone anywhere. While others of Blueblood's victims had gone home to find their families and friends had thought ill of them for stealing from them before running away, Vinyl had never believed that of Octavia. She had searched for her. She had never given up hope that Octavia would come back to her. She had even, in a last desperate attempt, gone to see a rich, connected stallion she had met only once to ask him to help her look for the love of her life, who had gone missing the night they met to watch her play. Vinyl loved her. She could trust Vinyl.
No, I don't want to talk about it.
Octavia set down the broken candle, its two sides dangling on either end of a long wick.
But I think I need to.
Vinyl did not smile, but she sat and listened without judgment as Octavia began to talk. Blueblood sat at the rough table in the prison cafeteria. He was surrounded by a wide variety of unpleasant types, most of them considerably bigger than him. They smelled bad too. Body odor was rank in the air. His last hoofacure seemed a lifetime ago. A large earth pony placed an untrimmed, unwashed hoof on the back of Blueblood's mane, stroking it roughly. Blueblood looked up at the towering stallion in the orange jumpsuit.
You're a pretty boy, ain't you?
He leered over Blueblood, clearly asking a question of a rhetorical variety. Blueblood was not intended to have any say in the matter.
Wanna spend a night with me?
Blueblood rammed a hoof between the stallion's eyes. He jumped on the large pony's back and tore out a section of the prisoner's mane, looping it around his neck. Blueblood